It was nice placement. It was halfway in between the synagogue and the docks. Sometimes my younger brother Andrew would stay with us too, but he enjoyed most of his time down at the docks at the pubs, and we didn't have much time to be together. Andrew and I weren't natives of Capernaum, though. We were from a nearby village, another fishing village, where we learned how to fish from our father, Jonah. But then a plague came through and killed my mother and my father and our two sisters. After that, we moved to Capernaum to get away from all of that. Also, Capernaum had much larger ports with Roman-built stone docks and the Zebedee processing plant where we could sell all of our fish. I'm an exceptionally tall man, and I'm enough taller than most of the people that they called me the big fisherman. I kind of liked it, but I'd never been a quick thinker, so it seemed that I'd always gotten in trouble because I'd let my heart push ahead of what I actually needed to do. So because of my physical prowess, I didn't really fear much of anything. I had a fisherman's knife that was only an inch shorter than a Roman soldier's sword. Everyone called it the fisherman's sword. Like I said, I never had to fear much of anything. My brother Andrew was smart, and I was big, and so we made a good team. He writes in both Greek and Hebrew, and he loves to discuss theological things with all of the people down at the synagogues. Through him, we became good friends with the Zebedee brothers, James and John, and found that we had a lot in common, even though they were aristocratic merchants and we were just fishermen. What we had in common was our interest in religion, and especially the new religious movements. We had all gone down together to go see John the Baptist teach and preach. Later, after going to all of these sessions, we met a Jesus of Nazareth, a new rabbi in town. John and Jesus were cousins, and some people thought that they were both born in miraculous ways. Both of them taught and preached in a new way to live a righteous life. And they taught that what you felt in your heart was more important than obeying all of the religious laws. There was something special about both of them, and it made me feel more important than I ever had before, even when I didn't understand some of the things that they were saying. Of course, the Pharisees were everywhere. And most of them didn't like what either John or Jesus were saying. The Pharisees focused their teachings on the memorizing of all of the individual laws, both the ones that are written in the scriptures and the ones that have been passed down from generation to generation. The Pharisees said to truly be righteous that I had to follow every single one of these laws to the T. And that's fine for some religious scholar, but for a fisherman like me, I'd worry about eating the wrong thing on the wrong day and every day having to ask forgiveness for my sins. It seemed like every week I would fail to say some sort of prayer, and I would have to ask forgiveness for that too. But John and Jesus emphasized that what was in your heart was more important than any of those religious laws. Jesus even encouraged people to pick vegetables on the Sabbath because feeding people was more important than some silly religious rule. Of course, when we went to the fields, the Pharisees were furious. The first time I saw Jesus was when Andrew talked me into going to hear John the Baptist. Andrew had become a disciple of John's and wanted me to hear about it. We traveled 2 days to the Jordan River, just north of the Dead Sea, near Jericho, where John was preaching and baptizing. On the second day that we were there, we were listening to John, and Jesus came up to the river and told John, "I want to be baptized." Now, usually it would be loud and people would be cheering and crying and yelling because people were getting baptized and they were being cleansed of their sins. But in this moment, everyone was silent. Some said whenever Jesus was baptized, they saw a dove flying across the sky. Some of them even said that they heard the audible voice of God. I just felt a great warmth flow over me, like I had seen something that was really important. That evening, Andrew said that he had been talking with Jesus all afternoon, and he had come to believe that he was the Messiah. He took me to meet him, and I walked into the house where Jesus was staying, and he looked at me and he said, "You, Simon, from now on I'm going to call you Peter." Peter means the rock, and I guess Jesus was just trying to say something about my size. I never did learn how he knew who I was, but after talking to him that evening, I was convinced that he was the most important religious leader that I had ever seen. Maybe Andrew was right. Maybe he was the Messiah. Over the next 3 months, Andrew, James, John and I, we spent more time listening to the teachings of Jesus. We went over to his house and heard him talk, and we had conversations with him over at the pubs. We followed him to the hillsides out of the town where the crowds got larger and larger. One day, Jesus came down to the ports as we were finishing our day of fishing. He called to me and Andrew and he said, "Come, and I will make you fishers of men." He wanted us to formally become his disciples, to be his official students. I was flabbergasted. I was excited for Andrew because I often thought he would go on to be a rabbi. He certainly had the mind for it. But me? I'd never been much into scholarly stuff. I was a really good fisherman, but I was afraid I wouldn't be much of a rabbi. But Jesus insisted. So he called James and John and 2 other fishermen, Philip and Nathanael. In the next few weeks, he called 6 others, all from the Capernaum area, to form an official band of 12 disciples. Some of the choices that he made even seemed stranger than us. He chose Levi, a tax collector, one of the most hated people in all of the town. He chose people like Simon and Judas. The rest of us feared that they would attract attention from people who were always on the lookout for insurrections. With half of the group made up of fishermen, these 3 seemed destined to be the outsiders. As disciples, we worked our regular jobs less and less. Instead of fishing 6 days a week, Andrew and I, we only went out 3 or 4. Some of the wealthier members of the group contributed to our cause, and some wealthy women, Joanne, Susanna, Mary Magdalene, and Zebedee's wife, also contributed funds, which were helping a lot. Of course, these women weren't official disciples. Who'd ever heard of a woman rabbi? But it was like they almost were. We began traveling further and further away from Capernaum because Jesus wanted to extend his message of hope about the coming kingdom of God to as many people as possible. We had learned more about his message. Jesus began sending us out on our own, usually 2 by 2, to preach in different villages. We weren't as good as he was, but we got surprising results, and the crowds continued to grow. About 6 weeks ago, we were up at this one place, and out of the blue, Jesus asked us, "When you are away from me, what do people say about me?" John Zebedee, the youngest of our group, he looked at Jesus and he said, "Well, some of you think you're John the Baptist or Elijah came back. They think you're a prophet." Jesus looked straight at me with an intensity in his eyes. He looked at me and he said, "Peter, what do you think of me?" I stood up, put my toe in the sand, and I looked at him and I said, "You are the Son of God." And then he looked at me with this amazing look in his eye, and he said, "This is the rock on which my church will be built upon. When I'm gone, the keys to the kingdom of heaven and all authority will be given unto you." I was humbled by his words, but was also filled with pride and excitement. He seemed to be saying, "Yes, I am God's Messiah, and yes, you are the ones I've chosen." At that moment, I was so happy I could have floated through the air. But then, Jesus became very somber. He ordered us not to tell anyone that in fact he was the Messiah. He told us that it was time for us to go to Jerusalem, where he would be arrested and beaten and killed. He also said that on the 3rd day after his death, he would be raised from the dead, but I didn't want to hear that. All that we heard was that he was going to go through great suffering and be killed. This shattered our vision of the Messiah and destroyed our hopes. We had hoped that the Messiah would come and free us from the Roman oppression and that we would have a free Jewish state. I was crushed. So often he had said things we didn't understand. So often we had heard him through the filters of our own desires. So often we had betrayed and denied him because of our own self-intents. My saddest memory, though, was the night before he was executed, when I lost all of my courage and denied him. That's right. The biggest fisherman became the biggest coward when Jesus was arrested. It's a burden that I'll have to carry for the rest of my life. After our Passover supper, as we were walking down the hill from the upper room of the garden, Jesus said it was time. He said that he had been betrayed by the temple authorities, and that the soldiers were soon to come and take him away. Sadly, when he told us this, we all abandoned him and run away. He would have to face death alone. I protested vigorously and said I would never desert him, that I would defend him to the death. He turned to me and he said, "Peter, even you will turn away. Before the second rooster crows in the morning, you will have denied me 3 times. I was angry. I blurted out that I would never desert him, and that I would die at his side before I would deny him. An hour later, when the soldiers came to the Olive Garden to take him, I whipped out my knife and I swung wildly at him, and I hit one of the high priest's slaves in the head and cut his ear off. But Jesus said to me, 'Peter, put away your sword. I must drink the cup that my Father has given to me.' Young John Zebedee and I, we followed the soldiers that they had pushed Jesus through the streets. We stayed in the shadows because we were fearful that they might grab us as well. When they took Jesus to the palace, John called to a woman that he knew because he had delivered fish to her before. And she let us come inside, and we gathered around a charcoal fire with some of the palace slaves. It was about 3 a.m, and the night cold had become very harsh. Some of the soldiers that had arrested Jesus were also near the fire. One of them noticed my rural accent and short fisherman's tunic and said, "Aren't you one of the disciples of that rabbi we arrested?" Fear welled up inside of me, and I blurted, "No, I don't know him." He said again, "You sound like a Galilean. You're one of his followers." Again, I denied knowing him. And then, just as the first glimmer of sunlight came across the sky, I heard a rooster crow, and I remembered Jesus' warning. I glanced at young John and saw both hurt and fear in his eyes. We decided to leave. And as we were approaching the gates, another soldier stopped me and he said, "Galilean, you were lying. You were in the garden. In fact, I know that you cut off that slave's ear." "No, no, no, you were wrong," I shouted. As I ran past him to the gate, I said, "I don't know the man." Just then, another rooster crowed, and I sat down in the street, my heart filled with shame, and my eyes filled with tears. Thank you.
Now you got to ski out.
Yeah.
Make like the one. You did a fantastic job. Thank you, Taylor. It's such a powerful scene. I think we forget. We have a tendency on Sunday morning to read these stories with stained glass voices. You know, we kind of read through them, and we don't read them with the raw emotion that these people had to feel, that they had to have felt. And we need to slow down and feel that and know that. Because we all have our own denials, don't we? You know? And we almost have to see someone else's denial, like Peter's denial, where he was so full of himself in that, I'll never deny you, God. And then to find himself caught doing it. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And, you know, we see someone doing that, and part of us wants to say, well, you know, surely I wouldn't do that. But then, how many Sunday mornings do we get to that silent prayer of confession? And it's a prayer we did a week prior, or 2 weeks prior, or a week and 2 weeks prior, or over and over and over again. Where we come to God heartbroken over something, only to commit it again. And I think sometimes we have to see hear somebody else's story to have our story mirrored back to us. And I'm really appreciative. I hope you guys, I hate the fact that Taylor had to run out because you won't have a chance to go up and congratulate him or tell him how well he did that, but please do on a Sunday or another Wednesday. We have just a couple minutes, and I do want to lift up a couple of questions. You know, the gospel stories are Jesus' story, but in each of the gospels, Peter's denial plays a very significant role. There's a lot of narrative about Peter's denial. Why do you think that's there? I mean, why do you think that the gospels put such an important role on Peter's denial? What do you think some of why that's there?
Because I think the reader does the same thing.
Because the reader does the same thing. Reader does the same thing. Other things you want to add to that?
He became the rock. So people with faults aren't limited by those character flaws.
Oh, that's a really good point.
If they allow Jesus to do what he plans for that life, those character flaws don't matter.
Yeah, if you can't hear, I'll try to repeat as best I can what people are saying. Ruth was saying, you know, Peter, the end of Peter's story is that he became the rock. He did become the rock that Jesus built the church on, despite his gross denial after his arrest. And God can take and use us if we'll yield ourselves over, even despite our largest character flaws. Our impetuousness, for Peter, I think there was impetuousness about him. He seems to always be reactive. You know, Jesus says something, and Peter actually basically scolds Jesus. That's a pretty bold thing to do. You know? No, Jesus, that can't be. And when faced with his own fear, he buckles and runs and flees and blurts the first thing that comes out of his mouth. And ironic that a person that would seem so impetuous or blown by the wind in some ways became what the rock, you know, the solid foundation. And God can take and absolutely reverse who we are and completely flip that over and use it for his purposes. So really good point. Thank you. What else? Any other reasons you think that the denial plays a...
Even the strongest will be weak.
Even the strongest ones will be weak. All through the Gospels, Peter is one of the strongest characters. He's a leader. You know, there's kind of it's interesting, there's a breakdown of layers of relationship in the Gospels. We have the multitude, which is the big, just sort of faceless masses that's referenced many times. There's places where we talk about the 200 disciples. We don't think about 200 disciples much, but there's a reference to that here and there. But then within that, there's the 12. But within the 12, there seems to be this little trio of Peter, James, and John. We have a lot of individual vignettes, scenarios that play out with only Peter, James, and John. But these solid characters, these strong figures, can wind up being the weakest one, and yet God still continues to use them. I think, too, the way that it's shared with us, it's pointing, too, to some of the, it points to the divinity of Christ, and it points to God's overarching plan in this story, because one of the things that happens is Jesus foretells it all. You know, even before it happens, he says, listen, Peter, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And so Jesus has this divine foreknowledge, and in some ways this shows a bit of his divinity. But it also is revealing that these things that are happening, they're happening by God's sovereign power. These things that are happening are fulfilling God's sovereign plan. Even things like Peter's denial. They're interwoven, and God knew that was going to be part of what was going to happen, as painful as it might be. I'm going to add in, this isn't a question, just an observation. After Jesus is resurrected, and he has his first encounter with Peter, and we don't get that far in this story, but I don't know what you remember about that. They're fishing, and Peter's so excited to know that Christ is alive. I think he leaps out with basically nothing on, you know. He goes swimming in the shore, and he greets him there, and they eat together, and I find it fascinating. Do you remember what was the question that Jesus asked Peter when he sees him again? Do you love me? And how many times does he ask him? 3 times. I don't think that's coincidental. I think that gave Peter the opportunity, after having denied him 3 times, to repledge his allegiance to him, if you will, 3 times. To look at his Lord and say, I love you, Lord. And to be asked 3 times to be fully redeemed back into that. So, amazing story. Any observations or thoughts before we wrap up? We're basically out of time. We get a lot of time after these, but they're so powerful. They're going to speak for themselves.
Do you think Peter maybe was fearful that, Christ didn't bring that great kingdom they were expecting? And you had the Roman soldiers along with him. Maybe he was fearful of that, kind of giving in and be on their side.
Yeah, there's got to be, I think there's several fears that had to be playing within Peter. One, at a very base level, as soon as somebody wanted to associate him with it, would be just the fear of, they're going to gather all of us up and arrest us. We're all going to get crucified. They don't know at that point he's going to be crucified, but they certainly knew that people were out to get him, because there are several times where they try to dissuade Jesus going certain places, because they're like, no, don't go there, Jesus. That's not a good idea. And for sure, there had to be some immediate fear of, they're just going to round us all up, and we're all going down now. And I'm not going to be no, I wasn't a part of that, for fear of that. But then there's also the even grosser, larger fear of, all this stuff I believed to be true wasn't true. There had to be a rattling of their confidence of, he was welcome. You got to remember, a week earlier, he rode in on a donkey being welcomed as a king, being welcomed as a Messiah. All the things they were doing, shouting Hosanna, waving palm branches, throwing them down on the path, all of those things were welcoming someone like a king. And now he is a criminal. And it had to shatter. They had to just be lost. Completely lost. And what do we do now? These are people, they have 3 years ago, they threw their nets down, they walked away from their jobs, they walked away from their families, they walked away from everything, and what their life has become, whatever they were picturing and envisioning their life to be, it's all gone now. or at least it's completely up for grabs. So I think there are a zillion fears that had to be coursing through them, but good observation, good observation. All right, well, let's wrap up with prayer because it is that time. Oh, next week, I'm going to do another character for you. I've been a little on the fence as to which one I should do. We have so many good ones. I could give you a choice. I could do Judas, which I think is going to be a powerful one, or Pontius Pilate. How many folks would like to see Pontius Pilate? We'll do a little quick vote here. How many want to see Judas? Looks like Judas won out. Okay, come back next week when I will betray Jesus. Gosh, doesn't that feel great? So, my announcement, come next week and see our, we'll put that in the paper, come next week and see our pastor betray Jesus. Everybody will be there. Scheduled for 6:30. All right, let's close in prayer. That really is going to be a powerful one. Gracious and holy God, we are challenged by these stories because I don't know how anybody sitting here can't at some point think, well, what would I have done? And there's part of us that in fear and trembling is concerned that we would have done exactly what Peter did. But God, that just tells us what we already know, and that is we're sinful, broken people. And our heart and our love and our allegiance isn't always where it should be. So we come to you, and we need you, and we love you, and we pray that we would yield our hearts over every day, moment by moment, to the love and the lordship of your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. And all God's children said, Amen. Amen.